She let her dead best friend take over her body. What happened next changed everything. A real love story about obsession, possession, and the moment you realize you have lost control. Let me ask you something before we even start. Have you ever had a friend who gave you the best advice? Someone who always knew exactly what to say, how to walk into a room, how to make someone notice you. Someone who just seemed to have all the answers. Now imagine that friend was dead, and she was still giving you advice. And tonight, she just asked to climb inside your body and speak through your mouth. Would you say yes? Because Lydia did. And what happened after that? Nobody saw coming. Not her. Not the professor. And definitely not the ghost who thought she was still running things. Welcome back to Romantic Stories, where love is never simple, never perfect, and tonight, not entirely of this world. If this is your first time here, you found us on a very interesting evening. And if you have been here before, you already know we do not do ordinary on this channel. Stay with me until the very end, because the story builds slowly and then all at once, and the ending is going to leave you with a very specific question that I think is going to divide this entire comment section right down the middle. Lydia had one friend, just one. And honestly, for someone like Lydia, that was already a miracle. She was the kind of person who moved through the world quietly, the kind of girl who sat in the back row and hoped nobody called on her, who faded into the background of rooms and somehow felt both relieved and sad about it at the same time. Making friends did not come easily to her. It never had. So when she found Juliet, or maybe when Juliet found her, it felt like something she had not known she was waiting for. They just clicked. Immediately, completely, the way it only happens a handful of times in your whole life. Juliet just got her. Sometimes Lydia felt like she had known this woman forever, which was strange, because the two of them could not have been more different. Juliet had the kind of effortless charisma that you either have or you do not. Confident where Lydia was shy. Beautiful where Lydia called herself plain. Sharp and quick and bold in every way that Lydia was not. And dead. Juliet was also dead, which was, admittedly, a complication. She was a ghost, bound to the campus library. Had been for years. And for reasons neither of them fully understood, Lydia was the only living person who could see her. Try putting on a little more eyeshadow. Juliet's voice was close, just beside Lydia's ear, hushed but confident the way she always was. Those baby blues are your best asset. It is high time you used them. Lydia glanced around the library nervously. Just bookshelves and long dark wooden tables. Dim lights throwing long flickering beams across a creaking floor. The scent of old leather, dust, and aging paper hanging heavy in the air. Nobody else was around. She turned back to the tiny mirror Juliet had insisted she buy and lowered the brush to her eyelid. Then she sneezed. Hard. The scent of wood polish and dust hit her allergies all at once, and she blinked through watery eyes at the smeared result. "I think I messed it all up," she said, dejected. Juliet's laughter came back distorted and echoey, bouncing off the old stone walls like it was carried by the building itself. Her ethereal form hovered just above the ground. As always, translucent and graceful, barely disturbing the still air. "So what?" Juliet said, still smiling. "You can always start over." Lydia smiled back, shy and small. She still could not quite believe this friendship was real, or whatever real meant in their particular situation. "I don't think I can do this," she muttered. Juliet rolled her eyes and drifted closer. "You bought the dress, right?" Lydia nodded. "Then pair it with those knee-high socks we picked out," Juliet said, pointing at the eyeliner with one graceful, translucent hand. "And your guy will absolutely lose his mind." "Tom isn't my guy," Lydia protested, feeling the heat crawl up her cheeks. "Not yet," Juliet said. "Just wait until he sees you in that lecture hall." Now here is where I need to stop and ask you something directly, before we go any further. Because there is a detail in this story that some of you are going to find romantic and some of you are going to find deeply unsettling. And I genuinely want to know which side you are on. Is it sweet that Lydia has a ghost best friend who is helping her get the guy she likes? Or is there something a little off about a dead girl with this much influence over a living one? Keep that question in the back of your mind, because it matters more than you think right now. The next afternoon, Rain hammered against the stained glass windows of the lecture hall, filtering the world outside into muted shades of blue and gray. Professor Aldridge's lectures drew two kinds of students: the brilliant ones who came for the literature, and the infatuated ones who came for him. And honestly, you could not entirely blame the second group. Lydia slipped in and scanned the room for Tom, finding him near the front, his tousled hair catching the pale light through the arched windows. She settled for a spot a few rows behind him. She was already self-conscious in the short dress and colorful scarf Juliet had chosen, and sitting too close felt like too much. "Good afternoon." Professor Aldridge's voice cut through the hall, and the room went immediately, completely quiet. He had that kind of presence, the kind that does not ask for a room's attention. It just takes it. Deliberate and firm in the way he moved, like the space around him naturally rearranged itself. Dark hair, sharp features, eyes that landed on you and stayed there a beat too long. He began the lecture, moving through Henry James and symbolism and Gothic literature with the kind of authority that made everything he said feel like the final word on the subject. And then Tom turned in his seat. His eyes found Lydia's and he smiled. That warm smile with the dimples she had been quietly losing her mind over for weeks. "Hey," he said softly, "do you have an extra pen?" Lydia's hand was already in her bag before she had fully processed the question. When she passed it to him, his hand brushed hers and the heat that rushed to her face was immediate and completely uncontrollable. "Sorry it took so long," she stammered, internally screaming at herself to say something else. Anything else, something normal and interesting and Juliet-like, but the words were gone. The rest of the lecture blurred past in a mixture of Professor Aldridge's deep voice filling the room with talk of Gothic themes and lingering attachments and a certain kind of beautiful agony called unresolved desire. Lydia was still thinking about Tom's dimples when the class began to pack up. "Lydia, please stay behind a moment." She stopped halfway out of her seat. Professor Aldridge was not looking at her yet. He was at his desk, sifting through papers, already managing a queue of students who were gathering around him with questions and barely concealed adoration. She approached slowly, confused, watching him glance briefly at the scarf still tied in her hair before looking quickly away. "I wanted to discuss your latest paper," he said when she reached him, his eyes lifting to hers. "On the fall of the House of Usher. Pretty bold stance you took there." Lydia shifted her weight, gripping her notebook tighter. She had barely read the material. Juliet had practically dictated the essay while Lydia typed. "Bold?" she managed. He arched an eyebrow, arguing that the house is not merely a symbol for the family's decay but a sentient entity is rather bold. "Yes." Pause. His gaze did not move. "That said," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "perhaps not as bold as submitting another student's thesis as your own." The air left the room. "Professor, I would never," Lydia started. "The name Juliet Reed." He said it quietly like it cost him something. "Does it mean anything to you?" And the floor shifted under Lydia's feet. Juliet's name. From his mouth. In that voice, with that expression. Something that flickered briefly across his face before he locked it away behind professionalism again. Something that looked, just for a second, like pain. How did he know Juliet? "Come to my office tomorrow," he said, his voice closing the conversation. "We will discuss your performance in more detail." She walked out of that lecture hall with her head full of questions and her heart full of dread. Lydia found Juliet in the library exactly where she always was, lounging against one of the dark wooden shelves like someone who had nowhere else to be, which, to be fair, she did not. "How did it go with Tom?" Juliet asked, her mischievous grin appearing before Lydia had even reached her. "Did he notice the dress?" "My literature professor accused me of cheating," Lydia said, cutting straight through. "He recognized the argument you told me to write. He called it your thesis, Juliet. By name. But there is something else in this story. Something in the way Juliet asked. Something in that flash of satisfaction when she heard Professor Aldridge's name. Something that did not feel entirely like friendship. Tell me what you think is really going on with Juliet. Because I have a feeling this comment section is about to get very, very interesting." Lydia felt her the moment it happened. a second consciousness settling into her like a warm tide. Not painful, not frightening exactly, just undeniably present. "Relax," Juliet said inside her mind, her voice low and almost pleased. "All you have to do is trust me." Lydia knocked on the professor's door. "Come in." The office smelled of leather and polished wood and the faintest trace of his cologne. Professor Aldridge was leaning back in his chair, blue eyes fixed and steady. "Please sit down," he said, and then Juliet took over. It was subtle at first. A slight shift in Lydia's posture. A new quality of stillness in the way she looked at him. A confidence that did not belong to her settling into her body like she had been wearing it for years. Lydia tried to speak. Juliet was faster. "Matthew," she said softly. "Can I call you Matthew?" Professor Aldridge's eyes went completely still. "No," he said, his voice rougher than before. "You may not." He was angry, but his breathing had changed. Juliet, through Lydia's mouth, tilted her head and smiled. "Feeling shy, are we?" His jaw tightened. "I do not know what you think you are doing," he said, his voice barely controlled, "but if you think for 1 second you can avoid plagiarism charges by." He stopped, because Juliet, wearing Lydia's face and Lydia's voice, had leaned forward. "Let's be honest," she said quietly, calmly. "You have no proof. And if you check the library records, you will find no record of me accessing any student archives. So whose work am I meant to have copied?" "Exactly?" Professor Aldridge went pale, and Juliet was not finished. She reached out and let Lydia's fingers graze the edge of his wrist, barely a touch, and watched his throat work. "What do you think of my hair?" she whispered, her eyes drifting to the orange silk scarf tied in Lydia's brown waves. "Does it remind you of her?" The air in the room changed completely. Something crossed Professor Aldridge's face that had nothing to do with anger. It was grief, raw and unguarded, there for just a second before he forced it down. "Get out of my office," he said. His voice was quiet now, strained. Juliet smiled with Lydia's mouth. 6 o'clock, she said. "The library, our place." He went absolutely still. "Leave," he managed. And as Lydia stepped out of his office into the cold autumn air, 2 things hit her at once. The first was the realization that the encounter had been, against all reason, electrifying. The second was the realization that Juliet had not just been watching from behind her eyes. Juliet had been running every single second of it. "Juliet," Lydia said, her voice shaking slightly as she moved away from his door. "What was that?" "You were supposed to help me defend myself, not flirt with him. Not say her name to him like that. Not touch his hand." "Oh, shush," Juliet said inside her, her voice warm and satisfied. "You loved it." "I did not," Lydia whispered fiercely, suddenly very aware of how she looked standing alone in a corridor, apparently talking to no one. "You said you were just going to watch. You said I would still be in control. Men like him do not respond to asking nicely," Juliet said, her tone shifting, something firmer underneath it now. "I protected you." He was not going to drop those accusations without a reason to back down. "But you called him Matthew. You mentioned her. You said our place like you knew where that was." Juliet was quiet for a moment. And in that quiet, Lydia felt something she had not felt before in all their months of friendship. She felt uncertain about Juliet. "Lydia." Tom's voice pulled her back. He was a few feet away in the corridor, watching her with concern on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. Juliet retreated in her mind, barely, hovering just at the edges, watching. "I am fine," Lydia said. "Totally fine." Tom studied her face. "You look pale." "You sure?" And Lydia wanted to say no. She wanted to say that her dead best friend had just possessed her body and said things to her professor that she did not fully understand yet, and something about this entire situation was beginning to frighten her. Instead, she watched Tom start to turn away, and Juliet slid forward. "So when were you planning to do it?" Lydia's voice said, cool and confident with a quality that did not belong to her. Tom turned back. "Do what?" "Ask me on a date." And that is where we have to stop tonight, because this is the moment where everything in this story tips. And I need you to sit with 2 questions before you close this video. The first one is about Lydia and Tom. Do you think Tom is going to ask her out now? And if he does, will it even count?